To every discerning and illuminated heart, it is evident that God, the unknowable essence, the divine being, is immensely exalted beyond every human attribute, such as corporeal existence, ascent and descent, egress and regress. Far be it from his glory that human tongue should adequately recount his praise, or that human heart comprehend his fathomless mystery. He is and hath ever been veiled in the ancient eternity of his essence, and will remain in his reality everlastingly hidden from the sight of men. Baha'u'llah. This week, we are so excited to have Ms. Paymaneh Parhami present a talk on what do Baha'is mean by God, a response to atheism. Paymaneh is an attorney who practices intellectual property litigation at a law firm in San Francisco. She has a JD from Berkeley Law School with a certificate in law and technology, and graduated cum laude from Columbia University with a bachelor's degree in political science and chemistry. Between college and law school, Paymaneh volunteered at the Bahá'í World Centre in Haifa, Israel, for 1 year as the administrative assistant of the Department of Security. Currently, she is involved in organizing meaningful spiritual spaces for the youth of San Francisco. Paymaneh hopes to use her skills to follow the Baha'i exhortation to be anxiously concerned with the needs of the age ye live in, and center your deliberations on its exigencies and requirements. And with that, I'll hand it off to Paymaneh.
Thank you so much, and thanks everyone for coming. So I wanted to give this talk today to just kind of continue the conversations we've been having in some of our previous talks about God and about atheism. And I know there's a lot of, discourse on social media I've seen on YouTube from different atheists and some dialogues between Baha'is and atheists. And so I thought it would be interesting to continue those conversations. Just to start off with, if you're not familiar, what the Baha'i definition or conception of God is. Baha'is think of God as an unknowable essence who's the source of all existence. This means that we can't understand really what the essence of God is, but God is kind of a shorthand for everything that is the reality of the universe that we can't understand. Baha'is believe that God has no physical form, but that periodically, some of the attributes of God are revealed through these divine messengers, which are called prophets, or in the Baha'i faith called manifestations of God. And these prophets or messengers or manifestations exemplify some of the attributes of this essence of the universe. Shoghi Effendi, who was the great-grandson of Baha'u'llah, described God as a personal God, unknowable, inaccessible, the source of all revelation, eternal, omniscient, omnipresent, and almighty. In the Baha'i writings, although God is referred to as he, like it is in some other traditions, that is just by convention. And actually in the original language, there are no pronouns, but that's the way it was translated. But Baha'is don't believe that God is, again, any human or physical being, or that he has any gender. In the Baha'i faith, various names are used to refer to God, and the one that is considered the greatest is the All-Glorious, or Baha in Arabic. So Baha'is view God as being responsible for all of creation, and that there's only one God, and that his essence is absolutely inaccessible from this physical realm of existence, and so it's completely unknowable as to what God really is. So, a lot of cultures and traditions obviously refer to God. Most religions refer to a God as well. There are many, I guess, different conceptions and definitions of God. And one of the things I'll get into is, that's one of the atheist responses, is that there's too many definitions of God, and God can differ between different religions. But in the Baha'i view, none of these things are contradictory. These are all just different ways that different cultures and peoples have attempted to describe and understand God, and none of them are in conflict. They're simply different ways of understanding God. And Baha'is don't see any faith as having a superior viewpoint on God. Even the Baha'i conception is not considered superior at all. It's just that in different cultures and time periods, there are, maybe different ways that human beings can understand God and come to express that knowledge. And that's why we see the differences in some of the definitions of God. So there are some quotes in the Baha'i faith about God. So I thought we'd just go through some of them before we get to some of the atheist arguments against God. Baha'u'llah says, "Far be it from his glory that human pen or tongue should hint at his mystery." Abdu'l-Baha, the son of Baha'u'llah, said, "That which we imagine is not the reality of God. He, the unknowable, the unthinkable, is far beyond the highest conception of man." Abdu'l-Baha also said, "All superior kingdoms are incomprehensible to the inferior. How therefore could it be possible that the creature, man, should understand the almighty creator of all?" So again, from these quotes, we see what I was talking about, which is that there's no even description of God or understanding of God that can actually come close to understanding the reality of God. Now, some may say, well, then why are there so many writings about God, even in the Baha'i faith? Why is God mentioned all the time? And if we can't even understand him? And to that, I would say these are just, like I said, very inadequate attempts to just describe this reality that is all pervading in the universe, but we can't understand. So we need some way to refer to it and some way to kind of conceptualize it. But again, that's just for our own benefit. It's not really reaching at all what the reality of God is. Baha'u'llah also says that every created thing in the whole universe is but a door leading into his knowledge, a sign of his sovereignty, a revelation of his names, a symbol of his majesty, a token of his power, a means of admittance into his straight path. And similarly, Abdu'l-Baha says, if we wish to come in touch with the reality of divinity, we do so by recognizing its phenomena, its attributes and traces, which are widespread in the universe. So if you see, in this sense, God is everything. God is everywhere. Everything is a sign and symbol of God. So Shoghi Effendi has specifically said the Baha'i faith does not believe in pantheism, which is that God has literally come down into everything and everything is literally God. But on the other hand, the Baha'i faith kind of talks about it in this sense to mean that everything exemplifies some sort of attribute of the universe. And in a sense, everything is one and connected. And so if we're looking for divinity, all we need to do is look around us and like marvel and understand all the wonders of the universe. So these are just some, introductory remarks about kind of the framework of how Baha'is understand God. And like I said, I mean, a lot of other religions, I think I read 60% of religions believe in a God. Some don't, but for the religions that speak of a God, a lot of people say the God that is spoken about in Islam is different than Christianity or different than Judaism. And, in the Baha'i faith, there is this concept of progressive revelation, which is that throughout humanity, the different attributes and qualities of God are progressively revealed through different prophets and different, wise spiritual leaders that bring these teachings to humanity. And so that even though they may seem like they differ, they're just different ways of understanding God, which, anyway, is already inaccessible to our understanding. So there are obviously a lot of different, atheist arguments and responses. And I kind of just took some of the main common ones I've heard, and I broke them down into ones that don't apply to the Baha'i conception of God and ones that do. So starting off with the ones that I think don't apply to the Baha'i conception of God. Some atheists will say that there are so many gods, and so the probability of any one particular God being correct is very low. So like I said, I don't think this really applies to the Baha'i understanding of God, because Baha'is are not saying our definition is correct or more correct than someone else's. And Baha'is don't believe in the plurality of God. We believe there's one God. Another argument is that there's a lot of historical and scientific inaccuracies in religious texts, like, not washing your hands, a lot of other things, and that these things conflict with science. And so that, that definition of God can therefore not be correct because there are other inaccuracies in these religious texts. I don't think this applies to the Baha'i conception of God, because Baha'is don't believe in any particular understanding of God, so there's nothing to be incorrect about that. I think that's actually the most correct and honest answer to what God is that it's something that we can't understand. So there's, nothing in the Baha'i faith that's inaccurate or incompatible with science when it comes to understanding, the definition of God, because it's by definition something outside of our understanding. So now moving into the atheist arguments that do apply to the Baha'i faith, meaning they, have some relevance to the Baha'i definition of God. The first one is that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So, atheists, say that believing in God is a huge claim, and that, we don't have enough proof for that. And, that we hold, we require evidence to understand other things or to believe in other things. Like if there were unicorns, if someone said there are unicorns, we would require a lot of evidence to believe that. But then for some reason, when it comes to God, which is even a bigger claim, we don't really hold it to that same standard of proof. So, and then coming along with this argument is also that the default should be not believing in God because there's no evidence put forth. That should be everyone's default position. And that then there has to be some overwhelming proof that then, makes you somehow believe in God. And I might be obviously missing parts of this argument, but that's like my understanding of the basic argument. And so my, response to that is that I think the default position should be a recognition that we don't understand the universe. I mean, no one does yet. Maybe someday someone will, but the only thing we know for sure is that we don't understand the nature of the universe. We don't even understand how the universe started. We don't know about all the other, galaxies out there. We have very, very limited information about the universe and why are we here? Why are we conscious? What's going on? Like, why are we experiencing this life? And so I think the default position should be just humility and recognition that there's something happening that we don't understand. And that's what I call, and that's what Baha'is call God. So I think the default position it should be that there's something we don't understand happening out there. And I don't think that saying that requires extraordinary evidence. I think the evidence is in front of us for that. I mean, no one's come forward with evidence explaining the universe or what's going on here. So in my opinion, the default should be a recognition that we don't understand what's going on. Another argument is that, there is no God because God isn't loving. He allows all this suffering to happen. Slavery, wars, a lot of wars have been religiously motivated. Really unfair things happen to children and to just different groups of people. And that if there was a God, he wouldn't allow these things to happen if he really is omnipotent and has everything in his control. To this, I would say, and I'm going to come to this one a little later, is that, human beings have free will, and the Baha'i understanding of God is not a being that's like dictating what's going on. Again, we don't know what God is, but it's definitely not that. I mean, we have no evidence to think that that's happening. So to say that there's someone out, this man in the sky that can just direct human events is not even, I think, the Baha'i conception of God at all. So, in the Baha'i writings, Baha'u'llah does refer to God as all loving, all powerful, all knowing, almighty. But I think that's just, intended to mean that God is the culmination of, everything in the universe. So when we say something's loving, like God is the source of love, God is a source of knowledge, of justice. It doesn't mean that, this specific human understanding of love as protecting people from suffering is what God is. Yeah, and so that goes into the next one. The next argument is that there are some contradictions in God's existence. So, for example, if God is omnipotent and omniscient, then how do human beings have free will? Because that's talked about in a lot of religion, including the Baha'i faith. In the Baha'i faith, we do believe in free will. The full extent of that, or how do we know what percentage of things are according to our free will and not? That is obviously not known to us. That's a mystery. But Abdul Baha, the son of Baha'u'llah, said that in all the action or inaction of man, he receives power from the help of God. But the choice of good or evil belongs to the man himself. And then he goes on to say, some things are subject to the free will of man, such as justice, equity, tyranny, and injustice. In other words, good and evil actions. It is evident and clear that these actions are, for the most part, left to the will of man. But there are certain things to which man is forced and compelled, such as sleep, death, sickness, decline of power, injuries, and misfortunes. These are not subject to the will of man, and he's not responsible for them, for he is compelled to endure them. But in the choice of good and bad actions, he is free and commits them according to his own will. So I think there are things that, like Abdul Baha said, there are things that are in our control. We have decisions we can make every day. We can choose between, taking a certain course of action, but no one can outrun death or sickness or just different, chance misfortunes that happen to people. We haven't figured out how to do that. No one is immune from that. So I don't think that, the thinking of God as someone that's just directing human events is not compatible with the Baha'i understanding of God. God is just, like I said, a shorthand for this unknowable essence that's the source of the universe. For us to put a definition on that and say that means that it's a specific being that can direct human events is incompatible with thinking of God as an unknowable essence. Another argument is about basically parsimony, which is that if God existed, it would be extremely easy to prove it. There wouldn't need to be all these like hidden allusions in religious texts, or, all these religious texts are like so many books, but there's just no like clear proof. There's no clear miracle or proof or just something someone can read to just believe in God. Otherwise, everyone would believe in God. And I would say, again, if God is an unknowable essence, there's nothing for us to understand. There's nothing to prove to us. In fact, the proof could be all around us right now and we don't understand it. So, thinking that something outside of our understanding has to prove something to us and convince us of something, I think is the wrong way of thinking of it. If we don't have the capacity to even understand God, how are we expecting that proof to come in a specific form? I guess, a lot of people are looking for a scientific proof, or some miracle. But again, that's all circumscribed by the human mind and what we are expecting the proof to look like. So I think that's not a good argument in my opinion, because again, we are creating this idea of God and then saying that idea has to satisfy our exact preferences as to like the proof of God. I don't think that makes any sense. And another argument, which kind of ties back into what I was talking about, is that religious people use scientific evidence sometimes to prove the existence of their prophet or some aspects of their religion, but then they say that religion is not provable with science. So that is kind of similar to what I was talking about, but a little bit different. And again, I think my response to that is similar to what I was saying before, which is that I mean, science is something we created to understand our own world, which is, this universe, this earth that we're living in. But there could be other universes that we can't perceive. I mean, that's the whole reason we have ideas of God and spirituality, is that we have this sense and intuition that there's something going on outside of our understanding. So I think saying again that we need our own specific scientific tools that many times don't even really explain what's going on in our world, our physical world, that we need those exact tools to be able to prove the existence of God is just assuming that we can even understand God. And I don't think that we can. And the last one that I will talk about is vagueness. Some atheists will say these definitions, if you're just defining God as something outside of our understanding, that's so vague that it's inapplicable to the real world. And like, why are we even talking about it? Like, if you can't even explain these religious concepts like God or, the universe, if it's just this like freewheeling definition that could mean anything, then it doesn't really mean anything at all. And I would say it's not meaningless. It actually speaks to this intuition I think we all had, especially I remember when I was a kid, like, and I was first like becoming conscious, like I was like 3. And I remember thinking what is this? Why am I suddenly like aware? Like, where did I come from? Like, I remember thinking that. And I think most of us, I'm guessing, felt like that or feel like that at some points in time. I think we just get so used to being alive and being in this world that we just take it for granted. But I think if you go back and realize that we just suddenly appeared and then we're like, whoa, like this, we're just having this experience. Like, why? What's going on? I think losing that sense of wonder and mystery and curiosity about the world is a problem, because that's really the whole point is we have no idea like why we're here and why are we suddenly, who are we? Why are we conscious? So capturing that and calling that, okay, there's something going on. There must be something out there. I don't think that's vague or inapplicable. I think that's the whole point. That's why so many people are, turn to spirituality, because they're trying to understand what is going on in the universe. And I think it's helpful and to call it God, or if it's not helpful for people, they can call it something else. You can call it universe, source, vibration, whatever they want to call it, whatever is helpful for people. If the word God is not helpful, we, don't have to use that word. We can use any other word. But I think grappling with these concepts is extremely important, because that's the whole point of life. I mean, the other things we're focused on are going to pass away very quickly. So yeah, I think those are just some of the main arguments that I've come across and that I wanted to respond to, but definitely open to other ideas and thoughts. And if people have any other questions or if they disagree with anything I said, feel free to go ahead and ask now, or you can ask later in the comments when we upload this video.
Well, thank you for your very all-encompassing talk. So now we will have time for a Q&A portion. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and I will read them in the order that they were received. One question is, does the Baha'i faith see atheism as a failure of religion? Wait, what is it? Oh, as a failure of religion or a necessary stage in like humanity's development?
I don't think I fully understand the question. I don't see it as either. I mean, I don't think the Baha'i faith sees it as either a failure or a necessary stage. It's just, I mean, I would say having an, independent investigation of truth is one of the core Baha'i principles. And so if that question is meaning like, is seeking and being curious and kind of approaching it with that attitude, is that a necessary stage? I would say yes, because it's equally as bad to just accept spirituality or God or religion just because that's the default, that's what your family believed or your community believes. So, I do think everyone's independent path is important.
The next question says, if God is the source of everything, is God also the source of evil?
I mean, people differ on, is evil just the absence of good or is it a separate force? But I mean, God is a source of everything. And so this is just my perspective. He's a source of everything. He created us and we have the choice. And human beings do things that are evil. Like, I don't think of anything in nature as evil. Like, I don't think of thunderstorms or tsunamis as evil because there's no intent or maliciousness. Nature just operates and runs its course. So when I think of evil, I don't even think of animals. I only honestly think of human beings and when they intentionally and maliciously harm others. And that is our choice. I don't think anyone thinks that evil things just happen to happen. It's usually because people are choosing to do that.
Okay, next question says, is there a way we can apply a scientific process to think about God?
Um, I mean, I think kind of going to what I was saying, which is thinking like, what's your default and what do you need to believe in something? And that there should be a process for believing anything. Um, so I think, like I said, for me, the process is I genuinely remember thinking, why, like, what is this? Like, who am I? Why am I here? Like, I was so confused. I just like appeared out of nowhere. So I think going back and just going to the very beginning and thinking like, what is happening? And thinking, what are different logical explanations for what's going on? I think the natural conclusion of that is that there's something happening beyond our understanding, but you can feel free to draw your own conclusions. But I think there should be a process, again, of going back to the basics and exploring alternative explanations for what's happening.
The next question says, do you think that various mystic writers in the past have a better understanding of the cosmos, God, and consciousness?
Well, they definitely had a better understanding than me. But if the question is then Baha'u'llah or like the Baha'i conception of God, um, I don't, again, I don't think there's like better because I don't know what the correct definition of God is. So anyone's understanding, I mean, if it's helpful for some people, different types of explanations of God resonate more. And so some people like the mystic, poetic. I know I like the mystic and poetic explanations of God and explorations. And I gave a talk on the seven valleys and the four valleys before, which are different mystic works of Baha'u'llah. So that speaks to me. Some people like more logical explanations. They're all just, yeah, different, but no, none of them is better.
The next question says, what would you say to someone who's drawn to Baha'i principles but struggles with the belief in a personal God?
Um, I guess I would ask what you mean by a personal God. If it means like, I might have mentioned that phrase in the beginning, because Baha'is do pray, we pray to God. We think that there's some sort of individual relationship happening. Um, but I don't think, like I said, we believe in God as a being or someone that we can send specific requests to who will then fulfill them. Um, and so if that concept is challenging for you, I just would do away with it. I personally don't find it helpful. Maybe some people do, but um, if for you the more mystic and kind of mysterious explorations of God are more helpful, I would just go with that or whatever else is the most helpful to you.
The next question says, how is man's ability to choose a sign of God's attributes?
Um, I mean, there are a lot of hidden words, which is a work written by Baha'u'llah, talking about justice and equity and human beings' ability to discern right from wrong. I think that that's one of the mysteries in my mind that differentiates us from animals is that we have impulses, but we actively can choose not to follow them. The Baha'is do a fast every year where we don't eat or drink from sunrise to sunset. And I'm sure we all resist our impulses all the time, every single day, like I want to go back to bed and not go to work, but I have to wake up anyway. So I think the ability to choose is something that kind of differentiates us from other types of creation and is some sort of indication that we're having an aware experience that we have control over. And that is very interesting to me and shows that there's something happening that we don't understand.
The next question says that atheism seems more like a reaction against an unreasonable belief, and that perhaps our approach should be to explore how we search for truth rather than a new representation of God and religion, and what your thoughts are about that.
I mean, I definitely think for some people, atheism is a reaction against dogma and just like blind belief in random arbitrary things. And that seems really frustrating. Um, and I agree that the whole point is I think Baha'is and atheists can definitely agree without either person changing their mind if we can agree on how we search for truth and, the kind of attitude and approach we have to understanding reality. If both sides are open to just exploration and kind of start from an attitude of not knowing and just being curious, and I think, there can be a lot of harmony and compatibility even if nobody changes their minds.
The next question says, most religions define God as not just an unknowable force, but they say that God also manifests himself through people, is all loving, and has lots of attributes. How would the arguments for atheism apply to the expanded definition of God that religions teach?
Um, I think of those things as separate. I mean, even though when I was explaining the definition of God, I was talking about prophets, but I think that I personally think that you don't have to believe in everything a specific religion teaches. You can still acknowledge that there's a God, an unknowable essence, and not, not believe in the specific religion's teachings, and don't think that that religion comes from God. That's up for you to decide. I don't think that that means that you don't believe in God or you can't believe in God. But I think that having an open mind is what's important. Because just as bad as it is to just blindly believe in a religious dogma or a set of beliefs, I think it's also equally wrong to just believe that they're wrong and not be open to exploring them at all.
The next question says, how do Baha'is understand morality without divine command?
Well, in the Baha'i faith, there are divine teachings that Baha'u'llah has brought forth. And we believe that those are the moral teachings that, make sense and that we should follow. If the question's asking, can we have morality without religious command, divine command? We definitely can, but then we run into the issue of the whole thing about moral relativism. And just from a practical standpoint, some people may think eating other people is fine, and some people may think it's not fine. And so if we all have different definitions of what's moral, I don't think we really know what is the ultimate moral thing to do, but I think from a practical standpoint, we have to all agree on a set of moral principles just in order to function as a society. So I think, and the ones in the Baha'i faith make the most sense to me. So I think if we all follow one set of morality, in a general sense, of course, everyone can have their own specific decisions they make, but if there's overarching principles like justice, equality, respect, truthfulness, if we have a certain set of, principles we all adhere to, that just makes for the running of a more effective society.
The next question says, what does the Baha'i faith say about religion and God's worship in politics, civil society, and education?
Um, Can you repeat the question?
Sure. It says, what does the Baha'i faith say about religion and God's worship in politics, civil society, and education?
Um, Regarding politics and civil society, I mean, there aren't specific things, at least that I've read, that talk about religion and politics. But I mean, I know that, the Baha'i belief is that everyone should be free to believe and express themselves however they want to. And that the Baha'i way is not supposed to be forced on others or, indoctrinated into others. It's just something, it's a personal choice you're making for your own life. It has nothing to do with forcing that on others. Of course, in discourse, if you want to talk about it, and in America, we are free to talk about it. And so that's the great thing about it. You should be able to have respectful discourses with other people, but it shouldn't be something that's like, a national religion that's forced on others or something. And in terms of education, I mean, the Baha'i faith, moral and spiritual education, especially for children, is considered really important. But again, everyone has the choice, and it's not something that should be forced or indoctrinated into people.
One question says, does the idea of a divine morality being used to govern society conflict with the American idea of separation of church and state?
Um, well, I mean, I don't think the first part is what Baha'is would think. I don't think there should be like some sort of formalized national religion. Like I said, yeah, I don't think Baha'is think that there should be a religion that's like something that's adopted by the whole country or the whole world. That's someone's personal choice. That's unrelated to, yeah, like politics and, voting and democracy. I think your own spiritual decisions are not something that should be forced on society.
Well, with that, I think we can conclude the Q&A portion. Thank you again for your great talk. Next week, please join us at the same time, 12 o'clock Eastern time. And again, these talks occur every Saturday, so please invite your friends and family. And if you would like to be on the weekly mail-in list for these events, please fill out the contact form that I put in the chat, and it's also in the description box of our YouTube videos. And thank you again. See everyone next week.